What is the relationship of America's system of immigration controls to the critical importance of civil liberties to a free society? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this issue of Libertarian Angle. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
Hello, it's good to see you and to be with our viewers and listeners.
All right, Richard. So a lot's going on here with the Trump administration. Tariffs and USAID, Department of Education. But the big thing right now seems to me the system of immigration controls that you and I have been opposing for the entire 35, 36 years here at FFF. From our very first year where you were vice president of academic affairs, we've been saying that there is only one solution to this immigration chaos that has existed all of our lives. This is nothing new. It didn't happen during the Biden administration or the Trump administration. It's been going on all of our lives. As you know, I grew up on the border. I saw the chaos down there. I saw the police state. And you and I have been saying from the very beginning, there's only one solution to this. Just like we've been saying, there's only one solution to the drug war: legalize drugs and open the borders. There's no other solution. Unfortunately, not enough people have listened to us, so they continue hammering down, doubling down on this same failed, destructive system. And we see it happening now. Trump is doubling down, trying to make this system work. And look at all the things they've done over the decades in the police state along the border. Criminalization of hiring illegal immigrants. It wasn't illegal to hire them when I was a kid. We hired them on our farm. They were the hardest working people I've ever seen. Transporting illegal immigrants, harboring, caring for, warrantless searches of ranches and farms along the border or within 100 miles of the border, boarding of Greyhound buses. All these police state measures that you find in totalitarian countries, all designed to, we're gonna win, we're gonna make this system work. And of course, they never have. And which is why now Trump, sending troops to more troops. Biden already sent troops down there, trying to get Mexico involved to send troops over there to enforce our drug laws and our immigration controls. But now we have the latest episode, and that's dealing with this El Salvador situation. It's really a reflection of how this police state does not stay along the borderlands. You see, that was always the assumption, that America could just have the police state down there and it wouldn't affect the country. Well, that was always a pipe dream. And you and I have always said it was a pipe dream, that ultimately when you have tyranny and oppression in one part of the country, an omnipotent government, it's going to seep into the entire nation. It's going to become part of the nation. And we see this now with attacks on freedom of speech on immigrants, because illegal immigrants, or even immigrants in general, are a convenient scapegoat. I mean, nobody likes illegal immigrants, well, except you and me, and a few other people. But by and large, the populace in America hates illegal immigrants, so they make the perfect scapegoat. So they're attacking freedom of speech, the Trump administration. They're attacking other fundamental principles, but also the fundamental principle of due process of law. Now, there's no question that under America's immigration control system, they have a right to the authority, legitimate authority, to deport illegal immigrants. But generally speaking, the rule has been that's after notice and hearing. And this was called due process of law. It's a principle that's in the Fifth Amendment that stretches back centuries in British resistance to tyranny, stretches all the way back to Magna Carta, which is when the barons of England extracted an admission from King John that his powers over them were limited, that he could not take life and liberty in violation of the law of the land, which evolved into the term due process of law. So the idea has always been, okay, we can deport people, but we've got to give them notice and hearing. Give them a chance to explain why they're here. And what will happen to them if they're returned? Will they be killed if we deport them? Will they die of starvation? Give them a chance to be heard. That's just a fundamental precept of American life. And it's something we all should be very proud of because most nations around the world do not recognize due process of law. So what they did with these immigrants, Trump did, these Venezuelan immigrants, is they denied them due process of law. They didn't give them a notice in a hearing. That Trump said they're guilty. They're guilty. They're part of a gang in Venezuela, and he labeled the gang a terrorist gang because now that enables him to say, "Oh, war on terrorism, war on terrorism. I have all the wartime powers of a president: torture, indefinite detention, assassination. I don't need to follow due process." And so they put him on planes to go to El Salvador, where this guy has suspended all civil liberties. I mean, he's establishing law and order, and he's got these penitentiaries built up to incarcerate tens of thousands of people. And there's no habeas corpus, which has been described as the linchpin of a free society. That's civil liberty. And there's no right to counsel and no civil liberties. And so Trump is sending Venezuelan immigrants into the clutches of this guy in El Salvador. Uh, and so a federal judge intervened because some some of the Venezuelan immigrants filed suit and they got a temporary restraining order saying, well, you didn't give them due process. And the judge said, I agree. So he issued an order telling them to bring those immigrants back. And now it's in court as to whether they violated that order, which is phenomenal. That right now they're playing cutesies with the judge. They won't tell the judge when the planes took off, where the planes were when he issued his order. And the judge is being very clear. He's being very calm and very deliberate, giving them day after day, I'm ordering you disclose this information. And they're refusing to do so, trying to take it up to the Court of Appeals and trying to negate what this judge has done. But Richard, if we get to a point where the president has the illegitimate authority to ignore court orders and to ignore due process of law and civil liberties, what check is there now on the president of that type of country? It seems to me you don't need a judiciary anymore. You don't need a Congress anymore. You've got omnipotent power by the president, which was exactly the opposite of what our founding fathers intended when they set this federal government up. What do you think?
Well, I think we have to remind ourselves, besides some of the points you made, why these legal procedures are there, at least as I understand it. And that is to control and limit and restrain the passions of the moment. Clearly, people are extremely emotional and divided over the immigration issue. Certainly a very large majority from the public opinion polls that CNN or Fox or any of the others have done shows that a noticeable majority support Trump's immigration stance and consider that he's doing well given his campaign promises. Uh, and Trump has played to this as well as others who hold his views. They're all criminals, they're drug dealers, they're child molesters, they're human traffickers, the lowest of the low, the despicable, the evil, and who would want these kind of people among us? Every such person who is deported may very well mean one American citizen who is not molested, raped, murdered, robbed, and certainly that is good for the American people. That type of emotional response, and it's understood. It's a common human reaction. Who wants their daughter to be raped and murdered? Who wants their home to be burglarized? Who wants to be caught in the crossfire of some gang fighting on a street intersection? But the reason that these are there is precisely to pull back and to dampen the emotion by setting up rules and procedures in calm, deliberative fashion, so that injustices are not done. If you don't have these, then you never know who's going to be rounded up, who will be arbitrarily deported or imprisoned. They want to dump these people in Guantanamo, where they're deporting to them to this prison system in El Salvador. And innocent people could end up in this dragnet. And most likely some innocent people are. And I'm just talking in the context of the government's own immigration laws. I mean, you say that you have a right to deport someone who's lied on their documents to get a visa or a green card. You're saying that you have a right to deport people who are criminals. But how can you be sure that everyone has lied, even by your own benchmarks of the standard? Who's actually belonged to a gang? Who has committed a crime in the United States, or because he was maybe a criminal in another place, or you're concerned about him committing a crime here in the United States? Even by your own benchmarks, how do you know this? The presumption is innocent until proven guilty, that one is supposed to have one's day in court, that one has the opportunity to have a defense attorney, and that you have your Fifth Amendment right not to have to incriminate yourself, which minimizes the ability of the government to try to pressure you. I'm using the more delicate word than torture or physical abuse, to pressure you to say things that the Fifth Amendment would guard you from not having to say. But the fact is that if these are taken away, and if our allegiance to them are weakened, then we're running the risk of rampant violations of anybody's personal freedoms, their civil liberties. And that is a danger, because once you say that this can be done to, quote, the foreigner, particularly the undocumented or alien or illegal foreigner, what happens if the next president, or even the same president, decides that it's not just a matter of this person seems to us to be guilty of supporting a terrorist organization or a terrorist movement abroad that is against U.S. foreign policy, and notice the arbitrariness of that in itself. Well, what if a native-born, American-born citizen is saying these things? Is he not a threat to American foreign policy? Is he not a threat to the tranquility of the society in espousing such causes? I mean, what makes the difference between someone saying that they believe that Hamas is acting on behalf of the Palestinian people against the oppression of the Israelis, who's a U.S. citizen, versus someone here who's on a green card? It's still a person expressing their views about things. You can disagree with it. You can believe that they're wrong-headed. You can think that such views are need to be responded to and criticized and refuted. But the fact is that what is the difference between these two individuals? None. And as I understand it, Jacob, you're the lawyer. As I understand it, if you are here in the United States, certainly if you're here on a visa or a green card and so on, a work visa, you are believed to have the same civil liberties as any native-born American. So now to be discriminating and oppressing and denying due process to these individuals is a fundamental threat to the founding principles of the country. And if it can be done to individuals A, then it could easily be done to individual Bs. The non-citizen who's here in the United States, as well as the citizen in the United States. And of course, this has been done in the past. Certain members of the mafia were deported back to Italy. In the Red Scare of 1919, Americans who were either citizens or non-citizens, but who were viewed as expressing radical communist views in the face of the revolution under Lenin, and therefore a threat to American constitutional order, were put on ships and sent back to the Soviet Union. Several of them had been Russian originally, and not all of these people received any kind of due process. They were just rounded up, a rubber stamp, and on the boat, and you're gone. And these are dangerous, dangerous things, because they undermine the principles, the political philosophy, the ideal of rule of law, and run the risk of innocent people being caught up in the dragnet, as I said, and experiencing harsh and despicable circumstances, if nothing else, to be separated from their family by being thrown out of the country, if we allow this to proceed. So I'm deeply disturbed by this, deeply concerned by this. As an American, and just as a human being.
Yeah, well, your point about the that we don't really know whether these Venezuelan immigrants that have been sent to El Salvador were guilty of anything is really right on. Now, Trump is saying, well, they were members of a violent drug trafficking, people trafficking gang in Venezuela called Tren de Aragua. Um, but they've never been proven guilty of that. And even though they may have been members of a gang, what does that have to do with anything? That doesn't necessarily mean that they were involved in any criminal activity. And let's not forget that Venezuela is ruled by a brutal president there, a socialist, virtually communist president who is almost certain to lost the presidential election in the last presidential election, totally illegitimate. And so what a gang there is in Venezuela is sometimes not the same thing that we would think of. I mean, there's people there that he is labeled as terrorists that are opposing his regime that are simply dissidents that are trying to install the person who is really the legitimate president, the president they want in office. So that's part of what due process is. You give a person a chance to say, well, I was part of this group over here, but this is what I was doing here, trying to oust Maduro from power and so forth. Now, some families have popped up, interestingly enough, who watched the video of these guys being offloaded off the planes in El Salvador. And I don't know if you've seen the video, Richard, but it's creepy. I mean, I was thinking Nazi Germany as I was watching in the dead of night these people being loaded onto the buses. Well, they were buses instead of trains, like in Germany, but uh, and then forcing them to walk hunched over and then shaving their heads. And I'm thinking, oh, wow. And so families recognized their sons or their spouses on these videos. And they're saying, they didn't have anything to do with these gangs in this gang in Venezuela. So why did Trump feel that they were guilty? Well, it turns out that they found these guys had tattoos, and that if you were Venezuelan and you had a tattoo, that means you were members of this gang, and that's what made you guilty. So there's a good chance that a lot of these immigrants that are now in this penitentiary with no due process, I mean, no federal judge here has jurisdiction over that prison in El Salvador. And there's, like I said, there's no judicial review or habeas corpus down in El Salvador. You may have very innocent people who were simply here illegally. Okay, we know that, or we can presume that, although it is possible that they picked up legal citizens, it's impossible to know because there was no hearing provided, that are sitting there in this penitentiary. And as you point out, and rightly so, that when the government is able to destroy the procedural aspects of liberty, the civil liberties aspects, because the group that they're targeting is an unpopular group, a scapegoat group. Like in Germany, they targeted Jews. Well, yeah, Jews were unpopular. Hitler had said that they were responsible for Germany's loss in World War I, that they had betrayed Germany with the Treaty of Versailles that Hitler was using to rise to power. Well, when you target the unpopular group, everybody's cheering, yay, yay, this is great. But what they're not realizing is that when they destroy the rights of the targeted group, the scapegoat group, they're destroying the rights of everyone. It's a precedent. A good example of this was Jose Padilla, who the American citizen who was accused of terrorism, and he was being charged in federal court. This is post 9/11 with terrorism, which is right because terrorism is a criminal offense. Well, suddenly they removed him, the military did, from the federal court, put him in the custody of the military, and began torturing him. And this went to court, and people were there cheering. Well, he's a terrorist. He's a terrorist. So what? The military took control over this. So what if they're torturing him? He's an American citizen, and we came to the defense of Padilla, and people were saying, "Oh, you love terrorists. Why are you defending terrorists?" They don't understand, Richard, that's why they target an unpopular person, because the federal courts ended up upholding what they had done here, which now sets the precedent that in a national emergency or wartime situation, and remember, Trump is saying we're at war, they can now take Americans into military custody and torture them rather than federal court jurisdiction. So the point I think you're making is that by Americans cheering the destruction of due process of law for the immigrants, and the public opinion polls reflect that most people favor what Trump is doing with this El Salvador situation. They are cheering the destruction of their own liberty. Because if you can destroy due process of law, a principle that has been part of American jurisprudence for over 2 centuries, and stretching back through resistance to tyranny on the part of the British people against the tyranny of their own government, then you can destroy liberty. You're at the same time destroying the liberty of the American people. And
Yeah,
this is why we have always stood for civil liberties at this foundation.
yeah, people don't understand that once there are these precedents for what government can do, it's a two-edged sword. I sometimes tell my students when we're discussing some government regulations, controls, redistributions, I say, maybe you think that government should have this discretion, this authority, this ability to intrude into people's personal and economic affairs. But just remember this: how do you know how the next election will turn out? Whether it will be someone you favor or someone you oppose, who then has this arbitrary authority due to the precedent set by the person who you were more favorable towards. And I say to them, think for a moment of the politician you hate the most and trust the least. Imagine him having the power that you want this other candidate to possess in high office. Would you feel safe then? See, that people forget that it sounds right when it's when the person in office is going after the individual or the group or the minority that you are not sympathetic towards or vehemently hate. But you can't be sure how that authority, once it's given, can easily turn around and affect you just as much as others.
No, you're absolutely right. And essential to a free society is not only to do that analysis. Do you want your worst enemy to wield this power? Because you can't assume that your buddy's going to be in office wielding this power all the time. But you also have to be willing to defend the least popular in society, to protect yourself. Because if you don't do that, it's that old quote by Niemöller in Germany that first they came for the communists and I stayed silent. And then they came for the trade unionists and I didn't protest. And then they came for this person, they came for that person. And finally they came for me, and there was no one around to protest because they'd all been taken.
Right.
But Richard, in a larger sense, even if they had followed due process of law here, it seems to me that there's nothing that would prevent Trump and his goons from sending these immigrants to El Salvador. I mean, let's assume they'd followed the procedures. And it goes to show you how morally repugnant this system is, the whole system of immigration controls, that it's gotten to this point that not only do you have this police state along the border and the militarization of the border and the Berlin Wall that involves stealing of people's private property that had been in their families for generations along the border, but now you've got this horrific situation where you're sending people into the clutches of these dictatorial, authoritarian, totalitarian regimes, or even to Panama, which is not one of those regimes. But I read that they just deported a bunch of Afghan people from Afghanistan or Iran or whatever to Panama, where they're all sitting there saying, "What are we supposed to do?" And the Panamanian government locked them up in a hotel or something, wouldn't let them leave, and then they finally agreed to let them leave. But what are they supposed to do? It just seems to me a very, very dark, repugnant system that year after year just gets worse and worse and worse. And nobody is doing, it seems like what you and I are saying is you need to question the whole system. When you see your system moving in this dark, immoral direction, anti-religious direction, that's the time to do the soul searching and saying, hey, maybe FFF has been right. Maybe this really was a bad system from the beginning. And we need to do some real reflecting and soul searching and talk in terms of restoring freedom and free markets to the borderlands, where people are treated humanely like human beings instead of like animals.
Well, just sort of add to that, the famous Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises was always emphasizing that once you introduce government interventions, one intervention often has the result of leading to another intervention because you introduce some government control and it then doesn't have the effects you'd hope for. And unwilling to accept the fact that the control doesn't work and ending the control, you figure, well, then I have to introduce a new control to compensate and reinforce the first control that hasn't worked out, and so on and so on. And this is what we see. Well, first you say you're going to place a barrier at the border, and you're going to say we'll only let so many people in or certain types of people in. And now what happens is that people devise ways to get around your regulation. That is a border barrier. And then once they're here, you find out that once they're here, you now have additional problems. And to try to overcome those problems, the fact that your first intervention, a border barrier, didn't work, you have to now introduce violations of various civil liberties. And when those don't seem to work, you have to extend the violations of civil liberties further and further until you're now threatening not just those who you are pinpointing, but virtually everyone in the society, until finally you've done away with any respect and legitimacy and enforcement of civil liberties for anyone in the society. So one intervention leads to another, leads to another, and leads to another. And before you know it, freedom is gone.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you see it in immigration, especially, but you also see it in the drug war. And I think it's worth mentioning that you see Trump now integrating the war on drugs with the war on immigrants and the war on terrorism. He's labeled some of these drug cartels terrorist organizations. Why is he doing that? Well, because with the war on terrorism, you have these special powers, the powers of indefinite detention, torture, execution, assassination. And so it makes total sense that if you finally want to win the war on drugs after decades and decades of failure and death and destruction, wow, let's make it a wartime situation. Now we have omnipotent powers like, Duterte in the Philippines. Uh, well, but it never works. All you end up doing is getting a more and more totalitarian measures piled onto the previous totalitarian measures until, as Mises said, you end up with omnipotent government because you start adding up all these interventions that have been stacked on top of each other. And by the end of it, you realize, well, we've lost our freedom without really any kind of security. It's that old saying that I forget which of the founding fathers said it, that those who trade uh, liberty for security get neither liberty nor security, because who's going to protect you from this omnipotent government that is now supposed to be keeping you safe? So the outcome of this is that liberty is a whole. There's various aspects of liberty that integrate together. It's not enough to get economic liberty. It's not enough to abolish the Department of Education or USAID or welfare state agencies and so forth. That over here you've got civil liberties and the right to ingest whatever you want to ingest. They all come together. If you sacrifice one for safety or security, you're going to end up with none of them. And you really don't deserve freedom if you're willing to sacrifice freedom for the sake of security, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, that's a phrase sometimes used. Liberty is a seamless tapestry, which you cannot cut into pieces without losing the quality of the whole.
All right. On that great insight, we'll wrap things up. Thank you all very much for tuning in. If you're new to FFF, subscribe to our FFF Daily and to our monthly journal, Future of Freedom. Tune in, of course, to Libertarian Angle and my program, Trump Watch, each week. And Richard, I look forward to seeing you next week again for another round.
Until next time.